we're going to go going with the Baltimore Orioles. Okay. I'm going to have to take the command at the beginning here and get the lead off with this one. The Orioles had a very fun season last year. Now, someone who has seen this team struggle in years past, it has been a nice breath of fresh air. And I mean, you could honestly say from the moment Adley Rutschman came in, he had his catcher's mask on, did that nice look around, that nice picture, nice video you can see of Adley Rutschman just taking it all in. It looked almost like he inhaled the bad feelings of the Orioles fan base, exhaled it, and then they started doing pretty good. There was moments that we were only days away from being in the playoffs. The Orioles were in the playoff picture come end of September, Sean. I mean, how do you even talk about that? This is a great start to this conversation. The Orioles were pretty good last year.
Surprised me, and not even by a little bit. I did not see it happening. I knew it would be a kind of a rebuilding development year, whatever you want to call it. And then there's lots of talent on the roster, obviously, but the way that they were able to just come out of nowhere and continue to challenge for that wild card. I know there was a time where, as a Blue Jays fan, I'm sweating looking at the standings and just thinking, how is this even happening? So you knew they were primed for an offseason, an interesting one, regardless of how it would play out, right? Because they have to make that decision, like how do we go from surprising the American League East and and building upon that and still competing and still rebuilding. Like, it's a fascinating time to be an Orioles fan, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Definitely a surprising season in 2022. And I think the biggest question that most fans have, including the fans in Baltimore, is how do you capitalize on that moving forward? Obviously, we're sitting right now where we stand at today's date on the 14th of December. Every single team in the American League East, with the exception really of the Orioles, has done something as a decent splash inside free agency. Now, they did add Kyle Gibson. That is something that can help with the bolster of the rotation. We saw that with Jordan Lyles last year with Baltimore. They had just the guy who was not afraid to eat innings, and that really helped out with that younger core. Not sure if Kyle Gibson's going to be that guy. They might go in a different direction to still add in that aspect. I will say there was some interesting news, and we were talking about this just before we started. Obviously, the huge news broke last night that Carlos Correa went over to the San Francisco Giants. Crazy deal going over there. But an offer from Correa did trickle out that the Orioles did offer Carlos Correa 7 years for $190 million. Now, obviously, that is not as much as Correa is getting from San Francisco, but that does say that Baltimore is not afraid to spend money on a big-time player right now. And that's a pretty interesting concept, as we still have some pretty decent players left in the free agent pool, Sean.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the big takeaway from whether or not they were able to land Carlos Correa. It doesn't really, it's not going to change the fortunes of their season or their off season dramatically. But what it does say to the fans is that for the right player, they are willing to spend that kind of money. And the Orioles remind me a lot of the Toronto Blue Jays over the last couple of years. They're on that, the young talent is starting to come up, and the roster age goes down, and then you find out how much talent you really have, and it surprises a lot of people. Even the Blue Jays themselves. I think 2019 was that rebuilding year. And then they make the postseason in 2020, expanded playoffs, notwithstanding. And I think the Orioles are in a great position to do exactly what the Toronto Blue Jays did. You have a talent base now, and I think this is where you start, maybe not necessarily overhauling your roster like the Seattle Mariners or the San Diego Padres have done year after year, but you start to collect those kind of veteran pieces, the pieces that you think will be with you in the mid term. I don't want to say short term, and I don't want to say long term, but a mid term. Like the 4 or 5 deals, like a Hyunjin Ryu kind of deal, where you start kind of building that proven talent to add to the core, and then step by step, incrementally, in a few years, this Orioles team could be very, very dangerous.
Well, this year does start something that will improve the payroll, at least in the eyes of money wise, but nothing that's going to impact on the field. I don't know if you saw this, but the Chris Davis deferred payments do begin this season. So the Orioles, Bobby Bonilla, if you will, until 2037 does begin this season. He's going to get $9.16 million this year to have somebody call him Smash Davis sitting on the couch. So probably smashing 12 ounces of your favorite nectar. But yeah, interesting concept there. Really cool. Chris Davis, hey, he's about to get paid. That $9.16 million is for the next two seasons, 23, 24, actually in 25 as well. We talked about Kyle Gibson. Now, I think they're not done there. There's some conversations that they're still in the mix for Rendon, which is interesting. If they didn't get the Correa deal, maybe they'll put the money on a pitcher. Then there's also guys out there like maybe a Syndergaard, so maybe another term 1-year contract. I'll say this a lot on this show. There's not a 1-year deal I don't like, so I wouldn't be mad to see maybe someone like that, like a Syndergaard, coming over to Baltimore. What's your thoughts on maybe adding another piece like that?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to tell in the context of this offseason because pitchers are going for a rate that I don't think many people expected. And everybody is, for that matter. Let's be real; it's not just pitchers. So I think that's the first thing that I think you're going to see them spend money. And it may not necessarily land them, a Rodon type pitcher. Like the Blue Jays just signed Chris Bassett for a reasonable price, but that's 21 million a season, right? And he's their fourth starter. So that's the kind of the going rate here. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a Noah Syndergaard type deal. But I also wouldn't be surprised for a lot of people to say, well, that's a huge overpay, and the Orioles aren't really in a position where they need to be overpaying. But that's just the cost of pitching. So I think we need to kind of get our heads around that before we start, talking about who they could pursue and who they should pursue. I think that's the first thing that it'll look like they're spending more than they actually are just because of the inflated price of pitching. That being said, a Noah Syndergaard on a 2-year deal with an option for the Baltimore Orioles would look pretty good. I would say, because that kind of lines up with what I see is their kind of competitive window when they're really, really going to be one of the teams to beat in the AL East.
Now, this is a tough division, and I feel like we have said this probably for the last decade, maybe even longer, with maybe a period here and there, like a 1-year offset, right? When I think about this Orioles team, immediately my mind comes, well, are they going to be as successful as they were last year? Or are we going to see kind of like how the 2020 Miami Marlins were, right? Where they made the playoffs and then they fell off. Like, what kind of team are we going to see in 2023? I obviously hope for them to be successful and to be able to compete for a wild card or even an AL East championship. But someone who looks on it from the outside, Sean, what's your thoughts there? Do you think that the Orioles can be exactly where they were last year, or was there just maybe too much magic to repeat?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the trade deadline could have gone a massive. Sorry, let me try this again. The trade deadline could have pushed this in a massive direction one way or another. They could have had a complete teardown and Cedric Mullins and everybody. But they didn't do that. So to me, that's what's fascinating is they kind of kept a lot of that young talent that took them to be the surprise of certainly the American League. So I would say that the Orioles are actually a team that's kind of scary right now, given the fact that they're young, they're talented, there's money to spend. I'm actually kind of high on them as opposed to some of the other teams in this division. So I can see absolutely challenging for a wild card spot.
I like that. See, someone who
Yeah.
follows the Orioles, I like that. That you say that they are a scary team. Good to hear.